Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. We are now leading up to Parsha Teitzei. So in this week's Parsha, it starts out with the woman of a beautiful form. So this is when men would go out to war. There was often a tendency to, well, they would capture women, all sorts of terrible things would happen. So knowing this, the Torah puts in provisions for such an occurrence. And what they say is, if you capture a woman and you want to marry her, well, to take her, then the way that you are able to do that is you follow a process. First of all, she comes to very simply, she mourns for about a month, shaves her hair, and only after that, and lets her nails grow. Basically, she's unkempt. She's mourning the loss of her family, and only after that month would you be allowed to then marry her. The what's it called, the process being designed to actually like let passions cool down, people chill out. The thought that, okay, all he needs to do is wait 30 days would kind of relax him, and then by the time the 30 days comes around, it's not going to happen. That's pretty much the idea here. It then says, if a man will have two wives, one beloved and one hated, and they bear him sons. Basically, if a man has two wives, one of them is his favorite wife, another one is a wife that he's not so um, in love with. Uh, if he has a firstborn child from the hated wife, then he's not able to arbitrarily give the child of his favorite wife the firstbornship. Okay, I said that in a bit of a word soup, but what does that remind us of? Reminds us of a story way back when. I mean, this is the story of Yaakov and Leah and Rivka, because Leah was not the wife that he had intended to marry. Remember, he was tricked by his father-in-law into marrying Leah. He had always wanted to marry, what's it called? Rachel. He had always wanted to marry Rachel. And so the interesting thing is there's this snu'ah, this hated wife, the word that's used here. There's only one other time in the Torah that this word is used, and that word is used with Leah. So this seems to be a commentary on that story and telling you how to do it correctly. There's an interesting thing when it talks about yeah, what's it called? Joseph being thrown into the pit. It says that he had basically it mentions coats kind of twice. And Rashi says, well, what's going on here? That he actually had two coats. So when the brothers took off the coats to send to their father, what they did is they had taken off that second coat, that additional one. What's this additional coat? If all the other brothers have one coat, he has two coats. This is a symbol of firstbornship. That's a double portion. Remember, in the firstborn gets a double portion. They don't just get a single one. That's one of the sons. So essentially, this was a mistake that he had made. This was a problem that happened there. And now the Torah is being very clear and saying, if this comes up in the future, you basically don't do this. Then it talks about a wayward and rebellious son. This is it's very specific. The child needs to steal enough money from his parents to drink a whole bunch and eat a whole bunch, and all sorts of things need to happen. And then he is basically put to death. It's a very interesting one. It says specifically, like in the commentary, that he hasn't done anything bad enough yet to be deserving of the death penalty, but the behavior shows that he would grow up to it, which is an interesting one for me because we know that we aren't judged on our future sins. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on this one, but it does say very clearly, also in the commentary, that the specifics of this are so like clear that there's no chance that it ever actually happened. There was no instance of rebellious son kind of like this being put to death in Jewish history. And then just a little bit of a note. This all stems from, what's the first thing we learned about? This woman of a beautiful form. And what we're seeing is that if somebody goes out, it's almost like a knock-on effect. They're saying if you go out and you have these relationships with people that aren't based on a positive foundation, it's talking here about a woman that's captured in war, then there's family strife. You immediately get to a hated wife, the child, all of that strife, and that leads to a wayward and rebellious son. And it's almost showing you this ripple effect of what happens when family values break down. Then it says hanging and burial. So if somebody is put to death, he is hung on the gallows, but his body shall not remain overnight, because it's an affront to Hashem to basically have man who was created in his image hanging off the gallows. So in practice, what they would do is they would hang people on the gallows right before nightfall, so that they would be up for as short a time as possible, and then they'd be taken down. We then have a whole bunch of laws and stories and stuff about basically being concerned for another person's property. So it says basically, if you see someone's animal like cast off, and you hide yourself from them. So if you see an animal wandering, the animal's gotten lost, you need to go and return it to your brother. You can't just kind of see someone's animal running off and ignore it. And then it says, if you know he's not around, then you can gather the animal into your house, and it waits with you until he comes back. And it says, do it for his donkey, for his garment, for any lost article. And yeah, uh, and then it says that basically don't hide yourself from them. And talks about the way that it's worded is that if he's helping himself, then you're supposed to help. But if the man was just kind of sitting there and his donkey's like spilling stuff and he doesn't care and he's not helping because he's expecting other people to help, then you're not obligated to do anything. We then have here the prohibition for wearing garments of the opposite sex. So it says men can't wear women's clothes and women can't wear men's clothes. This is the source for a lot of the tzniut laws, and this is the reason why women don't wear what's it called, men's pants, for example. It's a very interesting one. I actually attended a fascinating talk about this 2 weeks ago, and it's quite sparse on the details here. And it seems as though where the details have come in has been in a response to what's going on in the times, in fashion sense, in dress. A fascinating thing is we kind of think of lowered standards of modesty as being like a recent thing, but the truth is, throughout all time, women have wanted to look good, and there's always been a tendency to dress for the fashions of the time. So a fascinating thing is that apparently there used to be sandakits. So like a sandak at a bris is the guy who would hold the baby while he is being brised. And apparently there used to be no problem, like a female sandak. Why did it stop? Because they started where fashion started shifting, and it became not uncommon for them to basically show cleavage. And so can you imagine the poor Mohel leaning over trying to do the bris and he's got cleavage in his face. So Sunday kits then became not a thing anymore, to the point where we don't have any today. It's not I mean, like, some people do, but it's really not a thing. Definitely not considered an orthodox thing. But it's fascinating seeing the history of that. Um, and this is where tzniut comes from. Then we have sending away the mother bird. So it says if you come upon this nest, this bird's nest, and you basically don't take a malabanim, you don't take the mother from the child. Uh, if you come to a nest, you see a whole bunch of eggs there, you need to scare the mother away, and you don't take the mother along with the eggs. We are going to come back to that at the end. That's the subject of the the big idea this week. We then learn about the protective fence. So if you remember last week, we said that we cover a few of these laws, but the protective fence is when you're building, you need to make sure that there's a fence around the roof so nobody falls, because if someone falls and dies, that is bloodshed. That is a type of murder. Then we've got the prohibition of kilayim. By the way, I think there's 74 mitzvahs in this parsha. This parsha has the most amount of mitzvahs than any other one. So we're going to try and fly through them as quickly as possible. We're not allowed, we're prohibited to sow mixtures together. So you can't have different types of produce that's growing in the same place. Then it says you're not allowed to have two animals, different animals working together. So you wouldn't be able to have like an ox and a horse both pulling the same cart or pulling the same plow, because each one pulls differently and you're going to be hurting one of them. We then get the mitzvah of tzitzit, which is adding the actual mitzvah of tzitzit is that if you have a four-cornered garment, you have to add the threads to the corners. And so we on purpose make four-cornered garments so that we fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit. And so it's actually interesting. There's some like poncho type items that you wouldn't be allowed to wear because it's a proper four-cornered garment and doesn't have tzitzit on it, which is really cool. Then it talks about a type of swinging system that is prohibited. So, oh no, never mind, that comes later. So it says here that if a man marries a woman and then he regrets it, he wants to take it back, but instead of giving a get, because what's the get? It's a divorce document that obligates the man to pay out a sum of money. So he wants to get out of the get, so he's trying to annul it. And he says that actually the terms of the marriage contract are void because she wasn't a virgin. And the marriage contract stipulated that she was a virgin. So it talks about that scenario. And basically, if the guy has been making it up and slandering her, then he gets fined. Okay. Um, 100 silver shekels. If I'm not mistaken, that's the amount of the get, but I could be mistaken, so don't quote me on that. And then that goes to the father of the girl, and he then cannot divorce this woman for the rest of his days. He's perma-married to her, which is interesting. But if it was true, then she has committed adultery. What it's talking about here is it's talking about the time period between betrothal and marriage. So we use an English word betrothal, but it's not quite that. It has a much more important, like not important, well, yeah, important, but it's much more of a legal sort of definition. It's kiddushin and then nisuin. So when somebody is betrothed in that kiddushin state, they are connected enough to the other person that if they were to sleep with anyone else, that would be full on adultery. So it's almost like a step before marriage. And beforehand, they used to have long waiting periods between this. They would get actually betrothed and then a whole bunch of things. And then, like months or months later, they would come back and get married. Nowadays, we do both at the chuppah at the same time. So what happens is that when that first part of the chuppah ceremony is the kiddushin, and then the rabbi gives a little bit of a speech or a talk or a break. What that actually does is that breaks up the two processes, and then we do them back to back. Just an interesting side note, but that is what it's talking about here. And so if it was true, then she has committed adultery, and the penalty for adultery is death. But what is interesting is that the death penalties always had to be pre-warned and have witnesses to the action and all sorts of things like that. So practically, I'm not sure how this would happen. Then it says, regular old adultery is punished by death. Then it says if a maiden was betrothed, basically if somebody is taken advantage of, if she is raped, then it's interesting. It says here that if it was within a space where basically if it was within a space that she could have called out and didn't, then I'm assuming here there's a suspicion that it was actually a consensual thing. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. But that would kind of be also death penalty. But if it happened anywhere else, um, then regardless, he has the problem on him, and she is pardoned. Just there's so much going on here. Then it gives a whole bunch of sexual prohibitions that a man can't marry the wife of his father. So that's not his mother. That would be either if the father has multiple wives or if the father remarried or anything like that. It says then these are forbidden and restricted marriages. So there's certain people that can't, it says, enter the congregation of Israel, which I believe is it marry or just joining the Jewish people in marriage? So they can convert, but they're not able to marry into the nation. And that is people with crushed testicles or severed organs. And it says that this is if basically there's certain people that aren't able to marry in, and it's got to do with this like sexual function. It also then says Ammonites and Moabites aren't able to marry in. So this is interesting because who is the most famous convert? Ruth. And Ruth is a Moabite. But it says it here that basically this restriction against the Ammonites and the Moabites are against the men because it was the men who had this problem against the Jews. And it gives a specific reason. It says, why can't they marry in? Because they did not greet you with bread and water on the road when you were leaving Egypt. This is a callback to an earlier story that happened while we were trying to kind of come close to the lands. There were a bunch of nations that turned us away. And so it's this lack of hospitality, which is seen as such a problematic characteristic that they can't enter. But this applies to the men because they were the ones who the responsibility would have been on to come and bring the water and the food and whatever. It doesn't apply to the woman. So Ruth is okay. She marries in. Then it talks about Edomites as well. Then it talks about keeping the camp sacred and sanctified. And it says, if somebody has a nocturnal emission, then he goes out of the camp, and only once he has mikvahed and purified himself, he comes back in. And there should be a special place outside that people can go to. It also then says, listen to this. You shall have a shovel in addition to your weapons, so that when you need to go, you shall dig with it and you shall go back and cover your excrement. So here within the code of conduct, it says you keep your camp a pure place, a clean place. Every soldier must have a shovel so that they can go like a mensch and take care of their business elsewhere. And this is the thing. The Torah is it's not just these lofty ideals and these things. It practically takes care of everyday life. And so there are what's it called, rules and requirements and ways to conduct oneself in matters of sexuality, as we saw before, and eating and going to the bathroom and everywhere. Then we've got an escaped slave. So this, in another talk I was in, I mean, he points to this quite strongly as being a defining factor in how the Torah deals with slavery versus how other societies dealt with slavery at the time. So it says an escaped slave that runs away, you do not return him to your master. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in whatever place he will choose in one of your cities. You shall not taunt him. So this is talking about a runaway slave running away from another master, another culture, another thing. If they run to Israel, they're taken care of. They are safe, they are not returned. This is a wildly, wildly different um, thing that happened anywhere else in the ancient world, where there were essentially treaties between countries that they would return slaves, they would return runaway slaves to the country, because every country had slaves, everyone had this workforce of slaves, and so they basically would return any runaway slaves. Okay, then we've got it's got some things here about not buying prostitutes hire, and not basically giving. It's read in here that you don't give proceeds of if you've made money in an illicit way, you don't try and clean it by donating it to a worthy cause. Then it says don't take interest and don't give interest. And then it says that if you make a vow to Hashem, don't be late in paying it. You have to observe your vows, and then we get a worker's right to eat. So workers that are working in a field, a vineyard, something like that, they are they are allowed to eat from the stuff that's in the place that they're working. It's considered cruel to have someone kind of be surrounded by all of that food and they're not allowed to eat any of it. And also it says here that if you yeah. Okay. Then it talks about divorce and remarriage. So this is what I was talking about before, which is an injunction against a type of modern day swinger, well, ancient day swingers club, where the idea is that you get divorced from your wife. So you actually have a get, you are now no longer married. Then if she marries someone else, okay, presumably you marry someone else as well, and then they get divorced and then you get remarried. So it's a way of going around and sleeping around, but just filling in some forms first, so that it's not considered adultery. And this is not allowed. And it says that it says you'll not bring sin upon the lands that Hashem your God gave you as an inheritance. Then, if a man marries a new wife, he shall not go out to the army, and he's free in his home for 1 year, so that he can gladden his wife. And this is, mitzvah to. There's basically 1 year after you get married where the couple aren't supposed to be apart, and it's a beautiful system of kind of really integrating a married couple and making it a solid unit. Then, kidnapping is not allowed. The kidnapper shall die. It talks about sarat. Sarat is not leprosy, because if you take a look at how sarat comes about, it doesn't make sense that it would be a contagious leprous thing. Rather, it's a physical malady. It's a spiritual problem that manifests itself with the physical thing. There's a lot that can be said about sarat. It's very interesting. Then it talks about dignity of a debtor. So if you have taken if you have taken collateral from someone in order to secure the debt, and it's something that he needs, you return it to him. So it says, if the man is poor, you shall not sleep with his security. So if you've taken a pillow as security or a jacket, you give it back to him each night. How wild is that? And it says, so he will sleep in his garments and bless you, which is nice. Then it says timely payment of workers. You don't cheat a worker, and you make sure to pay them on time. It then talks about individual responsibility. Fathers won't be put to death because of their sons, and sons won't be put to death because of their fathers. This is also wildly different from the ancient world, where entire families would be put to death, villages, things like that. But each person is judged on their own merits. And then it's a reminder to be kind to orphans and widows. It then talks about gifts to the poor from the harvest. And it says that if you're harvesting and you drop a bundle, you forget something, you leave it there. So you're not allowed to be harvesting and taking all your bundles and then you drop one and then you go back for it. Once it's fallen, it's there and it's for the poor. It's one of the various ways that this was kind of set in. And then it says, and also like you leave the leftover olives and the harvest and all of the stuff specifically for the proselytes, which is the converts, the orphan, and the widow. Then we get lashes. I mean, 74 mitzvahs here. It's like a crazy parsha. But it says when there will be a grievance between people, basically, he'll be hit with 40 lashes and he'll not add. So you're not allowed beyond 40. And what they say is they actually would only do 39 lashes. And then it says, don't muzzle an ox in its threshing. So when an ox is walking around and threshing, you're not allowed to cover its muzzle so it's unable to eat the grains and the stuff that is coming up. It then says, if two brothers, basically, this is the mitzvah of yibum. So what's the mitzvah of yibum? If there is a brother who is married to a wife, two people are married. The husband then dies and they haven't had any children. Then it's a mitzvah for the brother of this guy who's passed away to marry the wife, and then the child that is conceived from that is what's it called? Is said to carry on the name of the brother. In practice, this doesn't happen anymore, and it outlines the system here where it says if he doesn't want to marry her, then they go through the process of chalitza, which is she takes his shoe off, she spits on the that kind of over it, and that kind of annuls it, and then they don't get married. That's what we follow today because practically this, I mean, this is a really intense thing. What's happening is that the brother is bringing essentially the other brother's legacy, their soul, kind of back into the world. And you really need selflessness to be doing that, being the reason, and not to be some sort of sexual perversion or something like that. Especially because your sister-in-law specifically is one of the marriages that's not allowed. It's a prohibited union, which now becomes a mitzvah union. It's like a really, really interesting one. And it's fascinating. And it goes into the story of Yehuda and Tamar. So many different things here. The whole series of classes can be said on this. Point is, this is where it comes in. Yibum and chalitza. Then it says that there's a penalty for embarrassing another person. It gives an example of a woman who is trying to defend her husband, and she defends him by grabbing the private parts of the attacker. And it says if it was necessary, that was the only way, then that's one thing. But if she just did it and there were other ways to stop it, and it was like an embarrassing thing, then there's a penalty, a monetary penalty she would have to pay him for that embarrassment. And this is where we come in that if you harm someone, there are different things that you need to pay for: loss of work, loss of product, well, that's the same thing. But actually, the actual embarrassment of the wound, of the injury, is something that is taken into account when calculating the monetary penalty. Then it says honest weights and measures. So it says you need to have honest weights. What is this? Is that the way they would calculate the way that they would sell products is based on weight. So you're getting 100 grams of this. And the way people would cheat other people is by having dishonest weights. So you're pretending you're selling them 100 grams, but you're actually selling them 90 grams. And that is not allowed. And it actually says this is a toiva, this is an abomination. And then finally, it says, remember what Amalek did to you. So this week, we read about this memory of Amalek, and it says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt. He struck those of you who were at the back and basically wipe out the memory of Amalek from existence. And that is the completion of this week's Parshat Ki Teitzei. Anyone who needs to go, this is the time. The next idea that I'm going to give is repeated already in the short video that I'm going to send out later. So what is the idea this week? Well, we said it was going to be about the mother bird. And this idea, this mitzvah of the mother bird is if you come across a nest and it's with eggs, you want to take the eggs, and you see the mother bird is there as well. You're not allowed to take the mother bird. That's what the mitzvah is. You send away the mother bird and then you take the eggs. But the wording is very specific. It says, don't take aim al habanim. Don't take the mother from the children, which is interesting because what it means is the prohibition is don't take the mother bird, right? It's not send away the mother bird so she doesn't get sad when you're taking the eggs, which is kind of what we had learned as kids. It's very specific. The prohibition is against taking the mother bird. Now, what's the point of prohibiting that? Go outside now and try and catch a bird, right? Like, you're not going to be able to. Has anyone ever managed to just run around and catch a bird? It's incredibly difficult. You can spend a week out there and you're not going to be able to catch a bird with your hands. So what's the point of the prohibition? Well, that's exactly the point, is that you're coming now to the nest and there's a mother bird there, and You picture the scene. She's flapping and squawking and trying to scare you away, trying to get you away. And she's doing everything she can to get you to leave, except fly away herself because she doesn't want to leave her eggs, because she's staying to protect her eggs. All animals have this defense mechanism. And for the bird, their defense mechanism is to fly away. That's how they protect themselves. But now she can't fly away anymore because she's trying to protect her kids. So what's happening is you now coming to the nest and you think, okay, great. Not only do I get the eggs, I get a bird as well, because I could never catch a bird normally, but this one's staying there. They're not flying away. They're not moving. And the Torah says, no, that's not okay. You don't do that, because essentially what that would be, that's weaponizing motherhood. That's using motherhood. That's using their care for their children against them. And that's not okay. Yes, we can eat eggs. Yes, we can eat birds, but there's a right way to do things and there's a wrong way to do things. And that's not what you do. You respect the mother, you send her away, you don't catch her, and then you take the eggs and you leave. That's basically what it says. The fascinating thing is that this mother bird mitzvah is one of the very few mitzvahs it's incredibly rare, where we actually told what the reward is for doing the mitzvah. And the reward for doing this mitzvah is long life. It says you'll get a long life. There's another mitzvah which we are told what the reward is. The reward is also a long life. Okay, so this almost never happens where we're told what the reward is. And the second mitzvah that has the exact same reward, a long life, it's honoring your father and mother, honoring your parents, which is just beautiful, that these two connect. So that's the one idea. And now what we can actually do is we can go back all the way back to Bereshit and see where this first comes up, because it's a very, very unlikely place that we actually learn about this mitzvah from. So where does this word appear? It appears not word, the sequence. It's aim al habanim. It appears one other place in the Torah, and I'll tell you when. And I forgot to mention it. These ideas are from Rabbi Foreman from Aleph Beta, as always. So this idea is, if you, sorry, lost my train of thought. Cool. So Aim al Habanim appears one other time. When is it? It's when Yaakov he's been exiled. He's been exiled in his brother's he's stolen his brother's birthright. He's been exiled. He's been in Lavan's house for 20 years, working really hard. And now he's finally on his way back home. And is on his way back home with his kids and his children and everyone in tow. And his brother is still angry with him. And now he's coming up, and Esav is there, and he hears that he's got all of these men, and he's about to attack him, and like he's really worried. So he starts putting all of these preparations in place, and he sends messages, and he prepares gifts, and he does all sorts of stuff. And one of the things that he does is he prays to Hashem. And in this prayer to Hashem, he says that he's worried, he's scared that Esav will strike him down, aim al habanim, mother upon children. Think about it. He doesn't have to confront Esav. Yaakov has a defense mechanism. Like the mother bird, he can run away. But he can't run away now. Why is that? Because he's got the little kids. He's got the little kids, and they're going to stay, and the wives are going to stay to protect them. And so Yaakov's going to stay with everyone. Yaakov is trapped, but he's trapped because of this mothering, nurturing, like familial instinct. And how does the story end? So Yaakov is the mother bird. If Yaakov's the mother bird, then who's the hunter who's threatening the nest? It's Esav. But does Esav actually take the bait? Does Esav actually trap the mother bird? He doesn't. The story ends, he lets him go, he reunites with his brother, he doesn't use the children to trap him, and it ends up, it's actually a very positive story in the end of the day. The brothers reconcile. And this is a fascinating thing because right after that, we get one of the most puzzling sections of the Torah that people just haven't been able to answer why the heck it's there. We know that the Torah is so like careful about the words that it uses. It doesn't use any extra words. And after this, after that story, we get a whole section that's devoted to Eile Toldot Asaph. These are the generations of Asaph, and it's name after name after name of all of these descendants that came from Asaph. And there were kings and chieftains. Um, and this whole family, what's going on here? Now it makes perfect sense. Because remember, what's the reward for the mother bird mitzvah? That's a long life. And Asaph, we're seeing the fulfillment of his reward. What's long life on a national level? It's descendants, it's kings, it's princes, it's chieftains, it's this whole lineage of a legacy. That's long life, and he's getting it, and he's being rewarded it. And we see that happens straight away. And fascinatingly, it says specifically before there was ever a king in Israel. He gets his reward ages before the Jewish people actually had their first king, which is only after the exile in Egypt and coming all the way back. And the final cherry on top, which is just like amazing, is that the Midrash tells us that Asaph wasn't all bad. In fact, he was really good at keeping one mitzvah in particular. Can anyone guess what it is? That mitzvah, Kibbud Avaim, exactly. Honoring his mother and father, which is that exact same, that almost twin mitzvah, which has that aspect of honoring, parents and comes with that exact same reward, long life. And that's just a beautiful thing. And that really the idea here is um, you take a look at the Torah, and what we'll see a lot of in these later parts is that the Torah is made up of laws and it's made up of stories. And we have many more of the stories at the beginning and many more of the laws at the end. But what we see is that it's almost as though Hashem looks into the stories and into the real decisions that real people made and uses that as the material to make the laws that he gives us later. It's like something wrong a bad thing happens back then. There's a favoritism between wives. The hated wife ends up not getting the firstbornship. Don't do that. Then something good happens, and Hashem's like, okay, let's do more of that, like the mother bird story. And it's just the Torah transforms from being just like a list of rules and laws and stuff into this living document that is just so phenomenal and so deeply rooted, and it just gives such an appreciation for the history and the story behind the laws that we practice today. And that's the end of this week's class. Thank you for coming.